what's going to happen now is we'll have two of our respondents offer some comments, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back for the third. So our first on our panel is Brian Green. Brian has been trained both in genetics and in theological ethics. He comes to us from Santa Clara University, where he's assistant director of campus ethics. If you were worried about Santa Clara, yes, they do have campus ethics. And he also teaches engineering ethics in the School of Engineering there. And I work with Brian on and off on some common interests, especially bioethics and genetics, and also on transhumanism controversy. So, Brian, your response to Noreen.
Thank you, Ted. I want to first thank Professor Herzfeld for her excellent and thought-provoking paper. Thank you very much. As a response, I'd like to examine three small topics: metaphysics, death, and the future. So section 1, metaphysics will just not go away. From an Aristotelian perspective, humans and all beings in the universe are a composite of matter and form. And we should not overlook that information contains the word form within it. Information is what informs us. It puts form into us, particularly our minds, as in an answer to a question. In Greek, matter is hyale and form is morphe. A hylomorph is a matter form, and everything that exists is a composite of matter and form. Neither matter nor form can exist without the other. Matter without form is prime matter, or hyale prote, or proto-matter. In contemporary science, it would be something like matter energy. A state, or rather the state, that's not really a state, the place where matter and energy change into each other. Strictly speaking, prime matter is never found without form. Without form, it is nothing at all. Likewise, form is never found without matter. Without matter, a form is just an idea, and ideas only become real when instantiated. Very importantly, any particular instantiation of an idea is not the same as another instantiation of it. Identical chairs may be functionally interchangeable, but they are not the same in being. They are in different matter. More clearly, identical twins are not the same person. They may be very similar in form, genetically nearly identical, physically very similar except for scars perhaps, and even very similar neurologically. But no one would ever claim that they have the same consciousness or the same soul. They are different, separate beings. When contemplating uploading human minds into computers, we need to consider this. We could potentially copy a person's mind and or perhaps even 3D print it into an exactly identical biological neural matter. 3D bioprinting is already being done with liver, kidney, and skin tissue. Someday we may have the accuracy, even at the molecular level, to do this. But that will not make it the same person, if it can even be made alive and capable of consciousness. At best, it would be an identical twin. Attempting the same effort by instantiating the neural information into a computer program is perhaps a plausible way to copy a person as well, but it is still a copy, not the same person. There may be a way to upload a person without copying them, however. Neural prostheses offer us the ability to replace parts of the brain one bit at a time, and to make sure that each new part fits properly into the original whole. This has already been done with a rat as a proof of concept. Many humans have been fitted with brain-computer interfaces that have already permitted, for example, one paralyzed woman to do such fanciful activities as fly an F-35 fighter in a simulator using only her mind. This technology is being explored very rapidly and is permitting such miracles as restoring sight to the blind, allowing the paralyzed to move, and controlling Parkinson's and other neural diseases. The questions now become more interesting. If we can replace part of a brain with a prosthesis, then why not a whole? And if we can replace a brain slowly, then why not quickly? The key is to maintain functional wholeness as the parts are traded out. While this does run into the ship of Theseus question, it might finally allow us to answer that philosophical conundrum with some experimental evidence. The key is to maintain a parts-whole relationship. Copying tries to create a new whole. prosthetic replacement tries to replace one hole with new parts as the old ones run out. This, of course, still runs into Herzfeld's valid critique that humans are to be and ought to be embodied. We like feeling, the experience of tactile sensation, but such a cybernetic human would be embodied just in a prosthetic brain, perhaps a 3D bioprinted one, or with 3D bioprinted replacement parts with extremely small electronic circuitry connecting and integrating the whole. Artificial organs and tissues are already becoming a big business. And some artificial organs are biological, some are computer, electromechanical, and some are a blend. When we talk of information, we may think of computers and biology as separate categories, but they are beginning to merge and distinctions become blurry. We have discovered that many bodily functions are substrate independent. They can run on biological or electromechanical substrates, like a pacemaker or a dialysis machine, which is unfortunately still not miniaturizable into kidney size. Is consciousness itself also substrate independent? We cannot answer this question, but we may experimentally gather data towards an answer in the next few decades. Aristotelian hylomorphism seems to me like a plausible metaphysical theory for how the universe is constructed, but it has limitations. It seems awfully cognitively attractive, and as such, may just represent a bias in the way the human mind works. We think in terms of matter-form or matter-spirit dualism or dual-aspect monism. This is a near-universal human folk belief, and so when we look into nature, this is what we see, but we may be wrong. Furthermore, physics has already detected strange aspects to nature that we cannot necessarily easily add into this system. Dark matter and dark energy, as yet, are poorly understood, and so do not quite fit into the matter-energy schema. We also have no real idea as to how life and mind work. There are mysteries left in the world, and we are bumping into them, and yet that does not stop us, and should not stop us, from looking harder and further. Exploring mysteries is our job. The truth is that, to a great extent, our metaphysics is inadequate. Some metaphysics may have light thrown onto it by further research in physics and experiments exploring consciousness and life, but even then, metaphysics is by definition not empirically demonstrable. Metaphysical theories can only be evaluated relatively, as Ian Barber has noted, from correspondence to facts known by other means, by internal coherence, total comprehensiveness, and all else being equal, consequences for believing it. We can hone our theories towards truth, but ultimately, in an absolute sense, we are not at truth itself yet. Section 2. Death, avoiding death, and immortality. One only has to watch Star Wars movies or read Harry Potter to know that those who seek to extend life are the bad guys. The Lord of the Rings story is more ambiguous than Darth Vader or Lord Voldemort, but still, despite many good guys having long lives, the primary power, or rather one primary power of the One Ring is to extend life. It's a life extension technology, an externalization of a power which slips from its creator's grasp and ultimately destroys him. A morality tale for our technological age. Various other vampire stories, Frankenstein, and even religious mythologies, such as those of ancient Greece, don't really put a nice spin on the whole idea either. Yet many contemporary transhumanists and others through the centuries, for example, alchemists and kings, have disagreed. Why is this? Coming from a skeptical socioeconomic perspective, the dream of immortality is the dream of stasis. Those in power like it there and would like it to remain the same. If you are a king or a billionaire, you lose a lot of power and money when you die. It's like losing your kingdom in a war or the stock market crashing, even worse. For successful people to endure such losses seems very unfortunate and even unfair, but I do not want to dismiss the quest for longevity so easily. There are many who die not at a ripe old age, and ripe is perhaps an odd metaphor for the elderly, except with a grim reaper in mind. If death at an old age seems unfair, death at a young age seems even more unfair. And it's not only the deaths of the rich and powerful that matter, but also the deaths of the poor and the weak. If we can extend human lives, we ought to. Jesus tells us as much when he sends his disciples, us, forth to cure every disease and every sickness. That's Matthew chapter 10, verse 1. And to cure the sick, raise the dead, and cleanse the lepers. That's Matthew chapter 10, verse 8. The science of medicine plays no small part in this charge, though medicine is still at the edges of raising the dead. Which brings me to the sorry case of the human head transplant. If you haven't heard about this, you're going to hear about it. Italian surgeon Sergio Canavero is on a quest for immortality. Through head transplants, he hopes to extend human life indefinitely. He already has a patient for the head lined up. Now he just needs $15 million and another healthy patient/corpse for the body. There is a great and justifiable skepticism about this operation. Experiments like these on animals have not turned out well. They've never turned out well. Moving on to humans seems extremely irresponsible. Animals which experienced such operations survived for a few days, but awoke only sporadically in a state of confusion, extreme pain, and horror. An assisting surgeon at the time said that such operations should never be done again. But for the sake of argument, let's grant the possibility that Canavero will succeed and his patient regain complete health in a spliced body. What significance does this have for theology and ethics? Ethically speaking, even if technically possible without any negative effects like biological or psychological rejection, there is still the question of sourcing extra bodies and the huge cost. But perhaps headless bodies can be grown in the laboratory or 3D printed. The costs will likely come down with time, maybe even become an expected part of universal health care. Were all the technical problems solved, no minor feat, what then is there to oppose? I confess that despite my uneasiness, the best objection that I can come up with is that it will perhaps give us a distorted attitude towards death and life. We will come to see life as an expectation and come to see death as even worse than we already do. Or perhaps this is how we ought to be. Perhaps death really is worse than we now perceive it. Or in other words, it is our current perception of death which is really the distorted one. But this does also raise for me a strange theological question which may indicate further objections. Christians believe in a bodily resurrection. The body will be raised, but if one has a transplant or an artificial component, whether biological, electromechanical, or a combination of the two, who and or exactly what will be raised from the dead on the last day, and with which parts? This might seem like a silly question. After all, we know from Jesus that a resurrected body is not like a regular body. Presumably, we will have a very fine body in any case. But what if our body is not as good as we would like it to be? What if we had plastic surgery in life and our resurrected body lacks these enhancements? What if our new components make us better than God would raise us to be? What if heaven is just a poor imitation of the utopia we are constructing, and some feel we are already living in right now? This is what I have called in other places the will there be free Wi-Fi in heaven question. Here we return to the serpentine promise of becoming gods and knowing for ourselves the meaning of good and evil. We can judge God and nature, and they are sorely lacking, falling short of our high standards. What a poor creation we have. What a poor creator. Faced with this, we feel we must improve it. Jesus tells us to raise the dead. That is a serious and strange charge, but an enlightened humanity would not only raise the dead, but raise them and us to a higher level. Technology empowers. In the past, humanity was involuntarily constrained by weakness. Now we must learn to be voluntarily constrained by our judgment, our ethics. And this power will only increase. Power without control is deadly, so perhaps our newest research plans should be more towards control and not just power. We should not count on lack of technology to get us off the hook for answering these questions either. Technology will progress. We should also not count on our lack of imagination to protect us. On the contrary, Christians should show that we not only have equal imaginations, but better ones, which brings me to my third and final section. 3. The role of Christians in making the future. Christians should not be pessimists about the future. For nearly 2,000 years, Christians have gradually transformed the world for the better through education, healthcare, care for the poor, and many other projects. And Jesus' victory is already won. Yet now, at the dawn of the third millennium, we seem to find ourselves out of ideas. We are on the defensive, trying to cut our losses as secularization slowly grows over and into us. Our Christian hope has been pushed into the afterlife, while in this life we reduce our perspective to making some money and trying not to die too soon. This is a shrunken and unappealing worldview. Human beings need purpose more than anything else in the world, even more than life itself. That is why people will die for an idea, and even symbols of ideas, like a flag. Millions of Christians since the time of Jesus have given their lives both in life and in death to live and share the good news of the gospel. Where are our ideas now? Where is our purpose? We need to get our big ideas out there again, whether it be eliminating world poverty, or settling the moon, or raising the dead. We will get called crazy, but for 2,000 years, crazy has been much better than boring. Choose your enemies well, for you will soon be just like them, the saying goes. The same goes for friends, since we are imitating creatures. René Girard's theory of mimesis can help us here. As Christians, we face an apathetic and pessimistic world. There is much fear, and much to fear out there, the world says. And so as Christians, we see this perspective of the world and we imitate it in ourselves. We become fearful and withdraw, and so everyone in the world becomes fearful and withdrawn. But this is not our calling. Competition with and imitation of the secular world is no good. We need to rebuild our original mission, recover our first task. We are not here to copy what is already being done, but rather to imitate Christ in our lives, to make God alive on earth in us, and to love God and neighbor. Christians need to disengage from mimetic rivalry with those who would antagonize us, and instead live our lives as though God were real. Rather than accepting the world's example, we need to set our own. All that is easier said than done. Imitation is so much easier than trying to determine for ourselves what it means to follow Jesus in 2015. Surely life in Christ does entail engaging such interesting questions as those presented by technological advance. But we should remember that our role is not only to be wet blankets trying to smother the Promethean fire of the new, but also to be leaven that raises the world towards God. That can mean many things, but included in that meaning is certainly not the pining for the days of yore that will surely never return. We have no time for that, whether we live 90, 900, or 9,000 years. In conclusion, I'd like to have a summary and some questions. First, metaphysics matters. As we learn more through science and technology, what will we also learn about metaphysics? Will it confirm what we believe or challenge it? Second, technologies for delaying death are on the way. How should we respond to them? Why are some technologies acceptable and others not? In other words, what are the criteria for knowing right from wrong in matters of life extension? Third, Christians should not surrender the initiative. Christianity has become successively less active and more reactive, and we can only regain the initiative by having bigger plans and better purposes in the world. What could some of these better, more inspiring purposes be? Thank you.
Noreen, later on, we'll have an open interchange between you and the panel, but we've got a moment right now. Would you want to address just one of Brian's issues, or go on?
Well, one issue I suppose that I would address would be that of neuroprostheses. That we do have these for helping with things like vision or controlling the tremors in Parkinson's disease. And the thing I would say about that is that I think, to quote St. Paul, section of the brain differs from section of the brain in glory. And that the sections that we are currently able to control or to replace with a neuroprosthesis are generally parts that are dealing with something rather mechanical, not with thoughts or memories or the kind of more ephemeral parts of the brain. So I don't think it's a simple extrapolation to say we could do this, therefore we could do the whole thing. I also noticed that those parts are not the parts that we see as being particularly personal or individual. Therefore, one size pretty much fits all when you're trying to help restore vision or control tremors, something like that. And with other parts of the brain, one size will clearly not fit all. So it just simply becomes a much more complicated issue than simply saying, if we can do this, it's obvious that over time we'll be able to do all of it. Not necessarily. There are a few big leaps in there.